we talk about blockchain, smart contracts, yeah, we started with this already. There are different worlds that meet, different contexts, but especially in this space, the worlds of legal and digital actually meet in a very beautiful way. In that way, we can make software that is contract based, and that's something that's quite new. So we need new tools for that. Whether that is, for instance, a new language on which Herman is going to talk, new ways of creating contracts, creating signatures. Inger is going to talk about that, and and also, of course, certification, because again, the question: do we trust what a software developer creates? These are actually the topics where the legal world can bring a tremendous amount of value to the world of software and what we can accomplish with software. So first I would like to introduce Inger Bijloo of Deloitte, and she will, a warm hand of applause, please. Yeah. And she will tells everything on the two worlds that are actually colliding, and her work also in the field of the Dutch Blockchain Coalition and what they're doing on smart contracts.
Thank you, Rutger. And thank you. Now, given the title of my presentation, which you unfortunately probably cannot read because I was sitting at the back just before and I couldn't really see, but I see someone nodding there, so you can read it either. It is implementing legally binding use cases, the legal aspects of smart contracts when worlds collide. I think most of you hope that I will just give you the answers to the question where the legal aspects and the technical aspects of smart contracts collide, but it's not that simple. In January this year, my colleague Jacob Boersma asked me to join a working group established by the Dutch Digital Delta, which focuses on smart contracts and the legal aspects of smart contracts. And the efforts of the working group resulted in a report which will be published later on this month, the 16th of November. But during this presentation, I will give you a preview, and I will share with you a few of our preliminary findings and recommendations. No. So before I tell you a bit more about the report, I think for those of you who don't know the Dutch Digital Delta, I should introduce the Dutch Digital Delta. It's a public-private combination of both governmental institutions, educational institutions, and industry, which focuses on ICT innovations. And of course, on the agenda is blockchain, which is being worked out by the Blockchain Coalition. Now, for us, for the working group, the most important action point of the Blockchain Coalition is to clarify relevant legal frameworks and identify and analyze possible legislative obstacles. And that's what we did in the working group. The working group also exists out of governmental institutions. The regulator, of course, the AFM joined us as well. But also educational institutions, diversity of universities, University of Tilburg, University of Leiden, Nyenrode Business University, and the industry, being consultant firms as Deloitte, IBM, but also blockchain-driven enterprises, and of course, very important, some law firms, such as Pels Rijken. Then that about the background of the working group. Now, what was the report about? Smart contracts, obviously. And our main question was to explore, or the main purpose was to explore the legal questions, and B, the need for knowledge when it comes to smart contracts. So we divided our group into 2 subgroups, of which the first I'll call the legal group. And the legal group's main question was which possible gaps and question could be recognized with regard to smart contracts and national laws and regulations. And the second group of what I call the technical people, more focused on the question, determine what knowledge is needed and should be developed, and what institution could fulfill the need for knowledge, or could fulfill the need for knowledge, or could develop trainings and education. Now, as you can imagine, the law in general is complicated for lawyers, but even more complicated for our technical people, as are blockchain and smart contracts for us, the lawyers. So what we started with was to search for common ground, and we tried to find a definition of smart contracts. And that wasn't easy, because there was a lot of misunderstanding between the 2 groups, a lot of frustration. But in the end, we succeeded, and I'll tell you when we come to the findings what our final definition was. But what we discovered was that a smart contract does not necessarily need to be a legally binding contract, or easier to say, an agreement between 2 or more parties. A smart contract can have many more legal forms than just an agreement. Again, unfortunately, you cannot see all the topics we mentioned here, but a smart contract can play a role in different areas of law, such as public law, private law, criminal law, but there are many more different areas. Now, because in our working group we only had lawyers who are active in the fields of public law and private law, we focused on topics and legal figures of what we thought would be the most possible and most logical smart contract appearances to be. So we start, of course, with agreements between 1 or more parties. But then the second one is suspensive and dissolving conditions. And those conditions are always used in combination with another legal form, such as agreements. But also, and there we come to the third form, unilateral acts. And for the non-lawyers under us, unilateral acts are, for example, dismissal when you think of a employment agreement, or annulment of a legal act, or recognition of a father of its unborn child. So you need 1 party, that's enough. And then the fourth one is one in the field of public law. Those are resolutions subject to public law. The fifth function of a smart contract can be a source of proof according to the Dutch Civil Procedure Code. And then the second one of the sixth one is also more a form we see in public law, and it's the automatic execution of a legal procedure. And finally, we thought what would be a very logical form or appearance of a smart contract would be the automatic compliance of tax obligations. And when you read the report, you'll find a lot of examples and questions we raised and we found, but unfortunately we don't have time to do all that. Now, beside the legal appearances or the legal figures, we also have general questions, general legal questions, such as, and I think people raised this question before, call it accountability. In private law, we call it liability. Who is liable and when and for what? And how do you deal with this liability when it comes to smart contracts? And then what law is applicable when there's no choice of law? Or how do people resolve their dispute when a dispute arises? Do they go to court? And when they go to court, what court is competent? And then in the public field, how do we deal with the general principles of sound administration? And then two very important ones, the last two ones, also raised earlier today, are digital identity. How do we ensure that one's digital identity corresponds with one's physical appearance? And how can privacy be guaranteed? Very important questions. And up front, I can tell you we didn't answer them all, but we recognize those questions and we try to analyze them. And I think all those questions in themselves are food for new reports. So to come to a conclusion, I'll share a few preliminary findings. Earlier, I told you that I'll share our definition of a blockchain smart contract, which is a blockchain smart contract is not more than a deterministic computer program which is being replicated and executed on a blockchain. It is, so to say, the if this, then that application on a blockchain, which sounds quite simple, and it could be. And then we come to a second point I mentioned earlier. A smart contract can be an agreement, but it does not necessarily have to be. It could be used in several domains, several legal domains, as I've mentioned earlier, and it can appear in different legal forms. And the third one I think is very important, has to do with the conditions of the automatic execution and remedies. And it is users of smart contracts should consider in advance the actual and legal possibilities of A, the automatic execution of an agreement and the prior fulfillment of conditions, and B, I think is more important even, the consequences of the undoing of the execution. How do you do it, and what are the consequences, and how do you deal with them? So the first findings are more legally driven. The recommendations are more knowledge driven. And here also we have a few recommendations, of which I picked 3. And the first one is divide the demand for knowledge into 3 domains. And there we start with the blockchain technology, which in itself can be divided into 2 subtopics, which is general blockchain knowledge, and the effect of blockchain technology on industries and business models. B, software and applications, which can also be divided into 2 groups. First one is programming language, very important. You need people who can program. And the second is front-end to back-end integration. And then the third one, of course, is legal and risk, which in itself can also be divided into 2 subgroups, which are first risk and governance, and secondly, all the different legal topics I've just mentioned before. Well, the second recommendation is identify the institutions that are able to fulfill the need for knowledge and develop relevant trainings and education. Well, we didn't really identify them in the report, so that has to be done still. And the third one is a tricky one, and it might be in contradiction with the blockchain technology, and it is a central point of contact or authority should be appointed to serve as a primary contact for development of law and regulations, as well as monitoring development of knowledge sharing and educational materials. Having said that, first steps have been taken, but there's still a long road to go. And I skipped the questions because I don't think we have enough time, but there's
time in the panel.
There's time in the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.